You know how in movies a bomb goes off, and for a few agonizing seconds, the screen just goes completely silent?
Oh, yeah. Like all the ambient sound just completely drops out.
Right. There's just this like high-pitched ringing. The characters are stumbling around in slow motion, completely disoriented, covered in dust, trying to figure out if they are even still alive.
It's actually a very specific cinematic technique. It's called sensory gating.
Sensory gating. Wait, really?
Yeah, filmmakers use it because it actually mimics real human physiology during a shockwave. All the normal context clues of your environment, they just drop away. Your brain enters a state of absolute hyper-focused survival.
Wow. I mean, it's incredibly dramatic on screen, but honestly, if you've ever lived through it, that is exactly what emotional trauma feels like in real life.
Oh, 100%. It's visceral.
Yeah, and if you're sitting here with us right now, tuning into this deep dive, I want you to think about whether you've ever had a moment like that. A moment that completely split your life into a definitive before and after.
Because we all have them, you know.
We do. We are talking about the kind of deep, blinding hurt that seems physically impossible to move past. The kind of hurt that leaves you with a ringing in your ears long after the actual event is over.
Right, because that ringing is the realization that the emotional safety you just took for granted is gone. The landscape has been leveled. You are suddenly navigating a terrain you don't recognize, and your nervous system is basically screaming at you that nothing is safe anymore.
Okay, let's unpack this because today we are wading directly into that rubble. We are going to map out how to untangle our deepest, most complicated hurts so that we are no longer held hostage by them.
Which is such a massive undertaking.
It is, but we have a great roadmap. We're pulling insights from Lisa Tricker's incredibly raw book, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And what drew me to this source material is that it's not just, one thing.
No, so real hybrid.
Exactly. It's this fascinating blend of theological research, heavy therapeutic frameworks, and her own brutal personal narrative.
It is remarkably vulnerable. And just to set the stage for our conversation, it's worth noting that while her text is deeply rooted in her Christian perspective, the underlying mechanics she's unpacking are universal.
Right, the psychology of it.
Exactly. The psychological frameworks regarding trauma, boundary setting, and cognitive restructuring, they apply to anyone. What's fascinating here is how she treats forgiveness. She strips away the cultural cliches. She doesn't frame forgiveness as some polite, free pardon for the offender.
Which is how we usually think about it, right? Like letting someone off the hook.
Right. But instead, she positions it as a critical, non-negotiable survival mechanism for the victim. It's about getting your own oxygen back.
Getting your oxygen back. I love that. So let's start right at ground zero, that moment of impact. The author talks about how traumatic moments create a personal BC and AD.
Yeah, which historically we think of as before Christ and Anno Domini, but she totally redefines it.
Right, she redefines it as before crisis and after devastation.
The linguistic shift there is just brilliant because it captures the absolute totality of the psychological change. I mean, a trauma isn't just a bad day that you string along with other bad days.
No, it's a permanent line drawn in the sand of your timeline.
Exactly. Everything in your brain is suddenly categorized by whether it happened in the safety of the before crisis or the wreckage of the after devastation.
And it aggressively rewires your daily reality. Like she points out that this line in time is drawn so sharply that it literally defiles your memory bank.
Oh, the memory bank piece is so tragic.
It is. Pictures of the past, which should be your most priceless treasures, suddenly become painful reminders of what no longer is. Think about, when your phone randomly sends you one of those algorithmic memories notifications.
Oh, right. Like, here's what you were doing exactly 4 years ago today.
Yes. And for someone trapped in the after devastation timeline, that innocent notification can literally knock the wind out of them.
Well, we have to look at what the brain is actually doing in that moment of temporal whiplash. Because normally, your hippocampus files memories away neatly with a little timestamp.
Like putting a file on a cabinet.
Right. But trauma floods the brain with cortisol. And the amygdala, which is the brain's threat center, it basically takes over. It doesn't timestamp the memory as past.
Wait, it doesn't?
No, it tags it as a present threat. So when you look at that old photo, the mind wants to scream at the past version of yourself to turn around, to run, to avoid whatever caused the crisis.
Oh, wow. So you're looking at something safe, but your brain is panicking.
Exactly. The brain is forced, without warning, to look at a reality that was safe, knowing exactly what horrific thing was waiting just around the corner.
And because we can't time travel to warn ourselves, we are just left stuck in the present with all this unresolved, agonizing pain.
Which is exhausting.
Completely. And to cope with that pain, the author says we deploy what she personifies as the soldiers of unforgiveness.
I love this analogy.
Me too. These are our coping mechanisms. They dress up as our protectors, but they're actually waging a guerrilla war against us.
The personification here maps perfectly onto how the psyche operates under severe threat, because the brain's primary directive is survival, not happiness. So it drafts these soldiers to build a fortress. Let's look at the first one, which is cynicism.
Okay, cynicism.
Right, cynicism acts as your security guard. It stands at the door of your heart and says, if you hope for less, you'll hurt less. Don't expect anything good, and you'll never be blindsided again.
Which, I mean, sounds logical when you're hurting. It sounds like really good advice.
It does, because it promises protection. But from a psychological standpoint, cynicism is a thief. It steals any chance of authentic intimacy because it requires you to assume bad faith in literally everyone you meet.
Man. And then you have bitterness. She describes bitterness as the high court judge.
So the judge.
Yeah, it sits on the bench constantly reviewing the evidence of how you were wronged. It demands that you wake up every day and restate your airtight case so you can hear a guilty verdict proclaimed over the offender, just over and over again.
Which forces your brain to continually loop the trauma. I mean, you're effectively living in the past, entirely focused on prosecuting a ghost.
Prosecuting a ghost, that's exactly what it feels like.
And that brings in the next soldier, which is resentment. Resentment carries a banner demanding vindication. It convinces you that the only way to heal is to make sure the person who hurt you hurts just as badly as you do.
Right. It ties your emotional state completely to their suffering. Like, if they are having a good day, your day is totally ruined.
Yep, you give them all your power.
Then there is delay. Delay is like a theater attendant. It offers you popcorn and a comfy chair made out of your own sadness.
A comfy chair made of sadness, yeah.
And it tells you it's perfectly fine to just sit there in the dark and play the old movies of your trauma on a loop. It tricks you into thinking that by replaying it, you'll eventually discover the secret reason why it happened.
It's the illusion of control. If I can just understand the why, I can prevent it next time. But, the why rarely offers the closure we think it will.
So true.
Finally, you have trust issues. These are the private investigators. They go on stealth missions, constantly scanning the horizon to catch everyone who might hurt you.
Always looking for the catch.
Exactly. They're trying to prove that no one is truly honest.
Yeah.
But instead of keeping bad people away, they act like a toxic gas, just suffocating any new, healthy relationship that tries to get close to you.
It is such a vivid picture of how we self-sabotage, and it leads perfectly into this story she shares, which completely changed how I view this whole thing.
The parking lot story.
Yes, the parking lot. She talks about a college trip she took with friends to a beautiful beach destination, and on the drive up, a small offense happened, like some minor argument or slight, the kind of thing you usually brush off.
Right, a normal road trip spat.
Exactly. But she was so deeply entrenched with her soldiers that she staged a solo protest. When they finally arrived, all her friends piled out of the car, ran down to the beach, jumped in the waves, and made these incredible memories.
And where was she?
She stubbornly stayed in the sweltering, hot asphalt parking lot for hours. She just paced around, sweating, stewing in her indignation, fully believing she was teaching them a lesson.
It's the ultimate visual for what unforgiveness actually accomplishes in the brain. If we connect this to the bigger picture, trauma essentially freezes us in the parking lot of our own lives.
So what does this all mean for the listener? I mean, if the parking lot is so miserable, why is our instinct to stay there? It makes me think of an analogy. It's like refusing to leave a burning house just to prove to the arsonist that they ruined your couch.
Oh, wow. That is a powerful image.
Right. You're sitting in the flames shouting, look what you did to the upholstery, while the roof is literally caving in on you.
That burning house analogy is spot on. And if we dig into the psychology of why we do that, we hit the concept of cognitive dissonance. Leaving the parking lot or leaving the burning house feels deeply unsafe because it feels like letting the arsonist win.
Like you're validating what they did.
Exactly. It feels like you are saying it's fine that you set the fire. We conflate staying in the pain with seeking justice. We subconsciously believe that our ongoing suffering is the monument to their crime.
Wow.
If we stop suffering, their crime disappears. But the stark reality is the arsonist isn't in the house. They're gone. You are the only one inhaling the smoke.
We think our suffering is the monument to their crime. That is so heavy. And, modern social media definitely exacerbates this BCAD divide, too.
Oh, constantly.
Yeah, we mentioned the algorithmic memories popping up on our phones. It triggers a visceral reaction. It constantly forces us back into the after devastation timeline against our will, making it so much harder to leave the parking lot.
Completely.
Mm.
And so if staying in the parking lot is actively destroying us, how do we leave? The natural assumption we make is that we just need to muster up more willpower. We just need to try harder to be a good person and forgive.
Just grit your teeth and do it.
Right. But the source text completely dismantles that idea. It tackles what we can call the myth of determination.
Yes, let's get into this because this is a vital distinction. Forgiveness is not an act of determination. It is not about gritting your teeth, clenching your fists, and forcing yourself to be the bigger person.
And there's a biological reason for that. The psychological reality is that human willpower is a finite resource. We call it ego depletion.
Ego depletion.
Yeah. If you rely on sheer determination to overcome profound trauma, you will exhaust yourself and eventually collapse because deep trauma requires infinite grace, and you only have so much battery life.
So true. She argues that forgiveness is actually made possible by cooperation. You aren't generating the forgiveness from your own depleted emotional reserves. You are cooperating with a grace that is bigger than you.
Right, which shifts the burden.
Exactly. For her, as she details in the book, that is the grace of God. But the underlying psychological mechanism is profound. You are surrendering the crippling need to manufacture the healing yourself.
And this brings us to one of the most liberating frameworks in the entire text. It is the fundamental difference between redemption and reunion.
I have to admit, when I first read this part, I had to put the book down. It totally shifted my paradigm.
It's a trap so many people fall into because of societal conditioning. Reunion, or reconciliation, requires two people doing incredibly hard, sustained work. It requires the offender to be actively repentant, to change their behavior, to demonstrate empathy, and to slowly rebuild trust.
Which you can't control.
Exactly. Redemption, however, which is where healing and forgiveness actually live, is a solo act. It is entirely between you and your higher framework of grace. You do not need the other person to participate, or even be alive, for you to experience redemption.
You can forgive someone while absolutely refusing to ever be in a relationship with them again.
Precisely. This raises an important question about how much societal pressure there is to forgive and forget. The author explicitly points out that forgive and forget is not a realistic or even a healthy psychological expectation.
It's actually terrible advice.
It really is. It implies that if you have truly forgiven, the relationship goes magically back to the way it was in the before-crisis timeline. But trauma permanently alters the landscape. When you separate forgiveness from reconciliation, you provide your nervous system with immense relief.
Because you're not waiting on them anymore.
Right. You can release the resentment and the bitterness without ever inviting the abuser back to your dinner table.
But to get to that place of authentic redemption, you have to actually deal with the mess. You can't just slap a smile on it. The author describes a metaphorical safe space she created with her friends, which she calls the gray table.
The gray table.
Yeah. They would bring their unhealed pain to this table to process without any judgment or pressure to fix it. And we aren't just talking about minor slights. It was an ex-boyfriend's engagement that unexpectedly brought up old grief, a dying lifelong friendship, and, incredibly tragically, a friend's college-age cousin who was murdered.
Unimaginable grief.
Yeah. The gray table was a place to admit that things were fundamentally not okay.
The necessity of the gray table cannot be overstated, because the alternative is what psychologists call intellectual bypassing.
Intellectual bypassing. Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. What does that actually look like in practice? Is that when we just try to logic our way out of sadness?
Exactly. The author actually confesses that her own counselor called her out on this. She was using hyper-spiritual coping mechanisms.
Oh, I've definitely done this.
We all do. She would sit in therapy and say things like, "I'm good, I've moved on, God will handle it," or "I'm mature enough to say it is what it is and get over it." She thought she was being strong and resilient.
Just checking the boxes of being fine.
Right. But her counsel told her, you hyper-spiritualize what you've been through to the point where you deny your feelings rather than actually deal with your pain. It was toxic positivity masking unhealed trauma.
That is such a common trap, especially for high achievers. We want to be the person who handles everything gracefully. we build this very eloquent, logical narrative about why we are fine, but logic doesn't heal the nervous system, does it?
It doesn't even touch the nervous system. Hyperrationalizing is a clever bypass around the messy, irrational, deeply uncomfortable work of actually feeling the grief. If you just slap a bumper sticker slogan over a gaping wound, it's going to get infected. Your body keeps the score. You can only heal what you are willing to acknowledge is real.
You can only heal what you're willing to acknowledge is real. That is the exact opposite of the fake it till you make it culture we live in.
Completely opposite.
But that begs a massive question. If we've established that we have to feel the real pain, and we've established that forgiveness doesn't require reconciliation, how do you actually start the process of moving on when the person who hurt you isn't even sorry? What do you do when the arsonist never apologizes for burning the house down?
This is the crux of the before crisis and after devastation divide. And if you don't answer that question, the unhealed pain will find a way to leak out.
Oh, it definitely leaks. The author gives a very visceral example of that leakage. She tells this incredibly raw story about being in her house, and she gets completely triggered by a memory related to her trauma. The pain was so intense and overwhelming that she just lost it.
A total nervous system hijack.
Exactly. She started screaming, flailing her arms, and she marched over to her glass front door and slammed it as hard as she possibly could. And right as the glass shook, she realized there was a delivery girl standing on the front steps, trying to hand her a package.
Oh.
Yes. The girl was absolutely terrified. She just set the box down and essentially fled. The author was left standing there in her foyer, realizing that her unhealed pain wasn't just hurting her anymore, it was creating chaos and projecting out onto completely innocent bystanders.
Unhealed hurt becomes unleashed hurt. The psychological chaos of that moment is a direct result of being in a holding pattern of emotional dysregulation. When you are waiting for the offender to make it right, your nervous system is stuck in a state of suspended animation.
And this leads to what she calls her Israel revelation, which fundamentally shifted her paradigm. Can you break down what she discovered there? Because it gets into some deep territory regarding how we view power and healing.
Yeah, I'd love to. She was on a tour in Jerusalem, and the guide mentioned something fascinating about the biblical text. He pointed out that there were only 2 recorded healing miracles of Jesus in Jerusalem: the lame man at the pool of Bethesda and the blind man at the pool of Siloam. The context of those miracles reveals a massive psychological shift. When Jesus asked the lame man if he wanted to get well, the man immediately started making excuses. He said, "I have no one to help me into the pool when the water is stirred." He was focused entirely on what other people weren't doing for him.
Waiting for someone else to fix it. And with the blind man, it was a similar external focus, but about blame, right?
Exactly. The disciples immediately wanted to assign blame. Who thin, this man or his parents, that he was born blind? They wanted a culprit. They wanted someone to hold responsible. But in both cases, the text shows Jesus completely ignoring the excuses about other people and completely ignoring the assignment of blame.
He just bypassed it all.
He did. He didn't require an apology from anyone who had wronged them. He simply gave one man a new way to walk and the other a new way to see.
So what's the psychological takeaway there for someone sitting here with us right now trying to heal?
It's about locus of control. The lame man and the disciples were operating from an external locus of control, meaning my state of being is dependent on the actions of others. If others help me, I heal. If I can blame someone and get justice, I have resolution.
Which keeps you trapped.
Exactly. The revelation is a necessary shift to an internal locus of control. Your healing cannot be conditional on the offender wanting your forgiveness or even receiving adequate consequences. You have to take the power back.
Hold on, I have to stop you. I am putting myself in the shoes of someone who has been deeply abused or betrayed. If I'm doing all this mental work, shifting my locus of control, dropping my demand for justice, isn't that just giving the person who abused me a free pass? It feels like I'm doing their homework. Aren't I basically saying what they did was okay?
It's a very natural pushback, and it's honestly the #1 reason people refuse to forgive. But it fundamentally misunderstands what acceptance is. In psychology, we use a framework called radical acceptance. Accepting a reality, meaning acknowledging that the house burned down and the arsonist isn't coming back with a check to rebuild it, does not mean endorsing it.
Right.
It does not mean saying the fire was a good thing or a legal thing or a fair thing.
It's just acknowledging the ashes.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Let's use a classic metaphor to explain the mechanics of this. Holding on to unforgiveness is like holding on to a burning piece of coal with the intention of eventually throwing it at the person who hurt you.
Okay.
You are squeezing this white-hot coal, waiting for them to walk into the room. Radical acceptance is realizing that the person isn't even in the room anymore, and they might never come back. The coal is only burning your own hand.
Yeah.
Dropping the coal doesn't mean you approve of how it got hot. It doesn't mean the person who handed it to you is innocent. It just means you want to save your own hand from third-degree burns. Blaming the offender, even when you are 100% rightfully justified in your blame, effectively hands them the keys to your emotional recovery.
Oh.
You are saying, I refuse to heal until you unlock this door. But here is the hardest truth. The person who broke you is fundamentally incapable of being the person who fixes you.
Wow. The person who broke you is fundamentally incapable of being the person who fixes you. If you really internalize that, it is incredibly empowering. It takes the power completely away from the offender and puts it back in your hands. You aren't waiting for a warden to release you. You have the key.
But having the key and knowing how to use it when your hands are shaking are two different things, which is why the distinction between a decision and a process is so critical in this framework.
Yes, let's move into this, because this is arguably the most crucial secret in the entire deep dive. We've established you make the solo choice to drop the coal. You make the conscious decision to forgive. But then, say, 3 months later, you're driving in your car, you hear a certain song, or someone uses a specific phrase, and boom, you are instantly triggered.
It comes out of nowhere.
Yeah, your heart races, your palms are sweating, you feel furious, you're crying, and the immediate thought is, I guess my forgiveness didn't work. I guess I didn't mean it. I'm a failure at healing.
Which just layers immense shame on top of the existing trauma. You feel like you were back at square one.
But the author introduces this profound framework that changes everything. Forgiveness is both a decision for the facts and a process for the impact.
Let's break down exactly how that works, starting with the facts.
She shares a very tactile exercise she did with her counselor to address the facts. He gave her a stack of 3x5 index cards. He told her to write down the specific facts of her husband's betrayal, one single fact per card. Just the objective, painful facts of what happened. She laid them out in a long line on the floor.
Yeah.
Then her counselor handed her a stack of red felt squares. She was instructed to verbally declare her forgiveness for each specific fact and then place a red felt square over the card, which for her symbolized grace covering the offense.
The psychological utility of physicalizing the pain like that is incredible. When trauma is internal, it feels infinite. It's a chaotic, overwhelming storm inside your mind. By forcing herself to write it down fact by fact, she is externalizing the trauma.
Getting it out of her head.
Exactly. It creates boundaries around the pain. It becomes a discrete list of events rather than an all-consuming identity. She is giving the pain dignity by acknowledging it specifically. And the ritual of physically covering it is a definitive, marked moment in time. Your brain registers that physical action. That is the decision. You are forgiving the fact that the event occurred.
But the facts are only half the story. The author uses this incredible broken leg analogy to explain the rest, and I think this is going to resonate with a lot of people.
I love this analogy.
Imagine you are driving, and someone blows through a stop sign and T-bones your car. The clash shatters your leg. Now, you can make the decision to forgive the driver for the fact of running the stop sign. You can do the 3x5 card exercise for the crash.
Right.
But years later, long after the bones have healed, you walk into your closet and see your old running shoes. You realize you walk with a permanent limp and you can never run a marathon again. Suddenly, you are overwhelmed with anger at that driver all over again.
And this is exactly where people think their forgiveness failed. They feel the anger and assume the 3x5 card exercise was a lie.
But it didn't fail. You already forgave the driver for the fact of the crash. What you're experiencing in the closet with the running shoes is the impact. You now have to forgive the driver for the ongoing impact of their actions.
This is a masterclass in understanding the nervous system and somatic memory, because the brain and the body are biologically programmed to constantly seek homeostasis or safety. When a trigger hits, like seeing those running shoes, the brain doesn't neatly categorize it as a sad memory from 5 years ago.
No, it freaks out.
Completely. The amygdala bypasses the logical prefrontal cortex and experiences the past trauma as a present immediate threat. Your nervous system is reacting as if the car crash is happening right now in your closet.
The author experienced this exact biological reaction in her own life. Months after doing the 3x5 card exercise, she and her husband were having a calm conversation in the kitchen, and he casually mentioned the name of a friend who had abandoned her during the darkest part of their crisis.
Just a casual mention.
Just drop the name. And immediately her body reacted. She started sweating, her pulse raced, her throat tightened, she couldn't breathe. And she realized in that moment, She had forgiven the friend for the fact of leaving, but she was now dealing with the impact, which was her ongoing severe anxiety and her newfound inability to easily trust new friends.
What's fascinating here is how she gives herself permission to continuously forgive those echoes of the trauma.
Mm.
By separating the fact from the impact, she doesn't have to judge herself as a failure for still hurting. She can recognize that the healing isn't broken, it's just ongoing.
I think the broken leg analogy is so powerful because it completely rewires your internal narrative. Instead of telling yourself, I'm so weak, I'm still crying over this thing that happened years ago, what is wrong with me? You can say, I am actively treating the ongoing symptoms of a severe injury. It removes the shame entirely.
It really does. It replaces self-judgment with self-compassion. You are managing a chronic condition created by the impact. But to effectively manage that impact, you eventually have to ask a deeper question. Why do certain things trigger such an intense impact while other things don't? Why does a casual mention of a name cause a full-blown visceral panic attack while another reminder might just cause mild sadness?
Which brings us perfectly to the next layer of this process. To understand why the impact hits us the way it does in the present, we have to trace the roots all the way back to our past. We have to look at what the author calls our childhood dots.
Because the reactions we have today, the panic attacks in the kitchen, they're rarely just about the event that happened yesterday. They're usually an accumulation of historical evidence. Your brain is referencing a much older file.
The author is incredibly vulnerable here. She takes us deep into her own childhood to show how these dots form and connect. She starts with her mother, who was essentially abandoned to an orphanage and then raised by older aunts in a very strict, very quiet house. Her mom was loud and bold. She even tells a story about her mom accidentally throwing a broom down a stairwell and knocking her aunt out cold. Her mom became her entire world.
So she has this intense foundational attachment to her mother, but it's set against a backdrop of instability.
Right. And then she details her own specific childhood traumas. Her father abandoned the family, she was abused by a neighbor, and she stayed quiet about it to protect her mother from more pain. And then there was this pivotal fifth-grade playground betrayal.
This part is so heartbreaking.
It really is. She had two best friends, and they all considered themselves outside the popular group. But one day, entirely out of the blue, these two friends decided they wanted to be popular, and their initiation ritual was to turn on her. They shoved her down in the dirt, called her ugly, and announced that no one liked her.
From a developmental psychology perspective, that is a profound trauma. For a fifth grader, peer attachment is essentially survival. Being exiled from the group registers in the brain as a literal death threat.
And it gets worse. She goes to the teacher, crying, covered in dirt, looking for justice and safety. But the teacher, instead of comforting her, scolds her for being too emotional and tells her to stop being so sensitive.
If we look at the neurobiology of what is happening there, we're watching the formation of childhood scripts. As children, our brains are highly plastic. When we encounter pain, rejection, or danger, our brains quickly write scripts to help us survive the environment.
Like a survival code.
Exactly. It's a process involving the myelination of neural pathways. Basically, the brain hardwires the quickest route to safety. The author's brain took the data from the father leaving, the neighbor's abuse, and the playground betrayal, and it wrote a very specific survival script.
And her script was, being vulnerable is incredibly dangerous. Telling the truth gets you scolded. Trusting people gets you shoved in the dirt. So what does she do? She learned to go completely silent. She blended in to the point of disappearing. She became the teacher's helper so she wouldn't have to go out to the playground at all. And internally, she started collecting files of proof.
The evidence collection.
Yeah. She meticulously filed away every wrong done to her, waiting for some ultimate judge to bring justice.
She became an evidence collector. And this is vital for anyone listening to understand. The script she wrote was highly effective. It worked for a fifth grader trying to survive a hostile playground. The problem is, our brains don't automatically delete those scripts when we turn 18.
We just carry them with us.
Right. We keep acting out these childhood scripts when we are adults, in environments where they are no longer useful and, in fact, are actively destroying our relationships.
And that is exactly how she connects the dots to her marriage falling apart. She married Art, a man who grew up in a very quiet home where performance was rewarded and emotions were stuffed down. She grew up loud, but deeply, deeply fearful of abandonment. She needed constant verbal reassurance to feel safe. He needed quiet withdrawal to feel safe.
This is a textbook clash of attachment styles. You have an anxious attachment dynamic meeting an avoidant attachment dynamic. When she feels threatened, her nervous system upregulates. She needs to talk, to pursue, to get reassurance.
And what does he do?
When he feels threatened, his nervous system downregulates. He needs to pull away, to process internally, to avoid conflict. They were perfectly engineered to trigger each other's deepest core wounds without even realizing it. Her pursuing felt like an attack to him. His withdrawing felt like abandonment to her.
Let me offer an analogy for this because I think it visualizes what happens when those styles clash. Think about vulnerability like the root system of a tree. If a tree's roots spread out really wide but stay incredibly shallow, it might look fine on a sunny day. But the second a mild storm comes through, the wind will knock it completely over because it has no anchor. For a tree to survive high winds, its roots have to push deep into the dark, uncomfortable dirt. Love is the same way. It needs depth, which means vulnerability to survive the storms of life. Because Art stuffed his emotions and she hid her true fears, their marriage was like a tree with shallow roots. They were surviving the sunny days, but the minute a crisis hit, they were uprooted. They didn't know how to go into the dark dirt together.
And going into the dark dirt requires stripping away the shame that keeps us in the shallow soil. The text uses a fascinating theological metaphor here to explain this, looking at the Genesis story of Adam and Eve.
This was such a paradigm shift for me. She points out that before the fall, Adam and Eve were naked and felt no shame. Usually we think about that in purely physical terms, but she extracts a psychological truth. They had no shame because they didn't have to manage each other's opinions. They knew their fundamental ingredients were completely basic dust and bone. They didn't have to pretend to be anything grander than they were because their value came from their creator, not their performance.
It's a beautiful allegory for radical self-acceptance. When you accept that you are made of dust and bone, meaning you are intrinsically human, you are fallible, you have flaws and childhood wounds, you stop performing. You drop the fifth-grade survival scripts. You stop collecting files of proof against your partner because you no longer need their perfection to validate your worth.
I want to challenge this a bit, though, because as I hear this, I worry about how it gets applied in the real world. Is it possible to overanalyze our past? Can we get so obsessed with connecting our childhood dots that we start using them as a permanent excuse for our current toxic behavior?
Oh, definitely.
Like, sorry, I screamed at you and slammed the door in your face, but my dad left when I was 8, so I have an anxious attachment style. You just have to deal with it.
It's a fantastic point, and it's the real danger of weaponizing therapy speak. We see this a lot culturally right now. But the goal of connecting the dots is absolutely not to build an airtight legal defense for your neuroses. It is not an excuse to avoid accountability.
Thank goodness.
The goal is to generate self-awareness. When you understand why you react a certain way, you generate self-compassion. And self-compassion is the absolute prerequisite for extending compassion to others. Once the author understood why Art stuffed his emotions, that it was his childhood survival script to avoid conflict, she could look at him with empathy instead of just anger. She realized he wasn't intentionally trying to abandon her. His nervous system literally didn't know how to tolerate the conflict.
So the awareness isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card, it's a map. It shows you where your own landmines are buried so you can finally do the work of disarming them.
Precisely. Which leads us to the final, actionable phase of this framework. You've collected the dots of your past, you've connected them to your present behavior and your triggers. Now you have to correct them. You have to rewrite the corrupted files in your brain.
The author uses this great historical reference to explain how we start correcting things. The canary in the coal mine. British miners used to take a literal canary down into the shafts with them. The bird's respiratory system was so sensitive that if there were invisible toxic gases like carbon monoxide leaking, the canary would stop singing or pass out before the miners even smelled it. It was an early warning system.
And we need an internal canary for our toxic perceptions.
Yes. We all have these invisible toxic thought patterns running in the background. They don't like me. They think I'm not good enough. They're purposely leaving me out. When you have unhealed trauma, you tend to personalize every single interaction.
Everything feels like an attack.
Exactly. Someone doesn't text you back immediately, and your internal canary should be squawking to warn you that you are making assumptions. But instead, you just inhale the toxic gas and decide the friendship is permanently over.
That is what we call a cognitive distortion. Trauma acts as a thick, dark filter over your perception. It warps how you see neutral data. The author uses a very relatable visual to explain how this filter works. the dust bunny versus the mouse.
This illustrates it perfectly. If you live in a normal house and you've never had a rodent problem, you might see a little gray ball of fluff scurry across the hardwood floor out of the corner of your eye, and your logical brain immediately registers, dust bunny, I need to sweep, or the AC draft is going to blow it everywhere.
Right, totally benign.
But if you have been previously traumatized by a massive mouse infestation and you see that exact same gray fluff, your brain doesn't see dust, it sees a threat. You scream, jump on a chair, and call an exterminator for a piece of lint.
Because perception dictates reality. In a traumatized brain, the amygdala prioritizes the historical data, the past infestation, over the present visual data, the lint. Your reality is that there is a mouse, even if objectively there isn't.
She actually tells a hilarious but totally applicable story about this involving broccoli soup. She was eating a bowl of organic broccoli soup and admiring all these delicious, coarse black spices in it. She finishes the whole bowl.
Oh, I know where this is going.
Then her kids come in, look at the pot on the stove, and start dying laughing. They zoom in with their phone cameras to show that those aren't spices. They have legs and antennae. They were bugs.
A horrifying realization for anyone.
She went to bed with a stomach full of bugs. But the point she makes is that while she was eating it, her perception was that it was gourmet soup. Her perception dictated her reality, and she enjoyed it. If our perception is filtered through unhealed trauma, we're going to see mice where there are dust bunnies, and we're going to see malicious intent where there is just human clumsiness or forgetfulness.
So the critical question is, how do we correct that corrupted perception? In clinical terms, we use cognitive behavioral restructuring. It's about forcing a pause.
Yeah.
You have to insert a microscopic wedge of time between the stimulus seeing the dust bunny and the reaction jumping on the chair. In that tiny pause, you have to actively interrogate your perception.
And the author provides a very specific tool for this interrogation. It's a set of 5 questions she asks herself to correct the dots in that pause. When she feels triggered, when she feels the impact of the broken leg acting up, she stops and asks, 1, what do I now believe about the offender?
Control.
2, what do I now believe about myself? 3, what do I now believe about the witnesses or people around the event? 4, what do I now believe about the world? And 5, what do I now believe about God? Or, for our broader purposes, the overarching moral arc of the universe.
Those questions are profound because they demand that you update your internal software. You are forcing the 5th grade survival script to be reviewed and audited by the adult, rational prefrontal cortex. You are asking, is this belief actually true today, or is it a ghost from 20 years ago?
There is a beautiful story in the text about a friend of the author's named Colette that illustrates this perfectly. Colette realized one day that she absolutely hated sunrises and sunsets. She would actively avoid looking at them, pull the blinds down, everything. Her family couldn't understand it.
It seems so strange from the outside.
Right, but when she started doing this work, collecting and connecting her dots, she realized that as a child, early morning and dusk were the specific times of day she felt the most threatened and afraid in her abusive household.
The environmental lighting of her trauma was permanently neurologically linked to the transition of the sun. The sunset was the trigger.
Exactly. But once she used the adult brain to interrogate that perception in the pause, once she asked, what do I now believe about the world? She realized the threat was gone. She had been safe in a loving home for 30 years. By actively correcting that dot, she literally reclaimed the beauty of the sky.
Wow, that is so powerful.
She can now watch a sunset with her family without her nervous system going into overdrive. She moved her timeline from before crisis and after devastation to what the author calls RH, resurrected hope.
Resurrected hope.
Yeah.
It's a deeply poetic phrase for what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to literally rewire its physical pathways based on new experiences and thoughts.
I love the concept of the multiplier effect of hope. The author compares it to when you decide you want to buy a specific car, say a white SUV. Before you made that decision, you never noticed them. But the day you decide you want one, suddenly you see white SUVs everywhere. At the grocery store, on the highway, in your neighborhood.
Wait, I want to expand on that because what is actually happening there is fascinating. That is your reticular activating system, or RAS, at work. It's a bundle of nerves at our brainstem that filters out unnecessary information so the important stuff gets through. When you set an intention, like buying a white SUV or looking for hope, you program your RAS to flag that specific thing as important. The white SUVs didn't magically multiply. Your brain just stopped filtering them out.
That is incredible. So if you make the active conscious choice to look for resurrected hope, Your RAS will start filtering for it, and you will start seeing evidence of goodness and healing everywhere.
It really makes you step back and marvel at the resilience of the human mind. The exact same neurological machinery that can lock us in an inescapable prison of trauma, the same brain that triggers a panic attack over a dust bunny, is the exact same machinery that can, with intentionality and time, build an entirely new framework for experiencing joy. It is the ultimate neurological plot twist. The brain that traps you is the very brain that frees you.
The ultimate neurological plot twist. What a perfect way to summarize it. Let's trace the massive ground we've covered today. We started by stepping out of that sweltering parking lot of resentment, realizing that staying angry only punishes us, while the arsonist isn't even in the burning house anymore.
Let him go.
Right. We learned how to radically separate our healing from the choices of the people who hurt us, dropping the burning coal. We mastered the difference between forgiving the fact in a single, defined decision and treating the ongoing impact like a broken leg that needs continuous, compassionate physical therapy.
Which is such a relief.
And finally, we traced our childhood script so we could rewire our brains to stop jumping at dust bunnies and start programming our reticular activating systems to look for white SUVs of hope.
It is a comprehensive roadmap from victimhood to genuine authorship of your own life.
And if you are sitting with us right now, reflecting on your own life, you might be holding a metaphorical stack of 3x5 index cards in your hands today. You might be looking at the facts of what was done to you and wondering if you genuinely have the strength to lay a red felt square over them. You might be exhausted.
It is exhausting work.
But remember the myth of determination. It's not about white-knuckling your way to forgiveness through sheer willpower. It's about giving yourself permission to stop carrying the crushing weight of the coal. It's about cooperating with a grace that wants to heal you.
And this leaves us with one incredibly potent idea to carry forward as you process all of this. We so often think of forgiveness as giving something away. We think of it as giving grace to someone who fundamentally doesn't deserve it. We view it as an act of surrender, a concession. But what if forgiveness is actually the ultimate act of taking? What if it is the aggressive, intentional taking back of your own future? When you forgive, you are ensuring that the person who broke your past doesn't get to author one more sentence of your life.
The ultimate act of taking back your future. I love that. So as you step back out into your day, listen for that high-pitched ringing to fade. The bomb went off, the dust settled, but you survived the blast. Now it's time to rebuild. Thank you so much for diving deep with us today. Keep your internal canary healthy, keep updating those scripts, and above all, keep looking for the beauty just beyond the parking lot.